That continues to affect much of Scotland and Northern Ireland on Friday, whilst the heat builds further south.
First and foremost, I am a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the People's Channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my two comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
The Live Desk with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Pip Thompson. It's here Monday to Friday on GB News.
From midday, we'll bring you the news as it breaks, whenever it's happening and wherever it's happening, from across the UK and around the world.
Refreshing, feisty, but with a bit of fun too.
If it matters to you, we'll have it covered on TV, radio and online.
Join the Live Desk on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
When the news happens, it happens here.
And really important breaking news.
Breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news starts here on Britain's Newsroom.
All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's Newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Congratulations to Nigel Farage, voted by you as the nation's best news presenter at the prestigious Trick Awards.
Hello, good evening. It's me, Jacob Rees-Mogg, on State of the Nation tonight. Our waxen wings of woke corporations are melting as they fly too close to the sun, along with the news that the majority of high street banks are signed up to Stonewall-linked diversity initiatives. The high and mighty Unilever has been accused of being an international sponsor of war by the Ukrainian government. In spite of repeated electoral mandates, mass migration is at record highs, but a new Tory ginger group claims to have a plan that could restore public trust. With the next election fast approaching, perhaps their views could help the Prime Minister boost confidence in the government. And it's either you les or you lose for the Mayor of London, as 5 London councils take him to the High Court over his controversial low emissions expansion. Well, Vox Populi, Vox Dei. We asked the people whose side they were on, and here's a taste of what they had to say.
Not all down to cars. You know, we're going to stop planes soon, are we? Is that the next story?
Plus, in a not necessarily fortunate coincidence for the Prime Minister, 6 months on from his 5 key pledges, his Conservative home approval rating dropped into negative territory for the first time. As inflation appears to be entrenched and the Court of Appeal has blocked the Rwanda scheme, is the government on track to follow through with its promises? State of the Nation starts now. Joined by a pugnacious panel this evening, former Brexit Party MEP Ben Habib and the author and broadcaster Michael Crick. As ever, I want to hear from you. It's the most important part of the programme. Email me, mailmog@gbnews.com. But now it's time for the news with Polly Middlehurst.
Jacob, thank you, and good evening to you. Well, the top story tonight is that the chair of the Privileges Committee, Tory MP Sir Bernard Jenkin, could be facing a police investigation into a lockdown party at Conservative Party headquarters. Sir Bernard has responded tonight in a statement saying it isn't appropriate to comment on a continuing investigation. Well, the Metropolitan Police will be reopening their investigation into the so-called Jingle and Mingle lockdown party at Conservative Party HQ on December the 8th, 2020, which Tory MP Sir Bernard Jenkin is said to have attended. 2 COVID regulation breaches allegedly took place during the party. Well, staying with politics, the Prime Minister refused to say today when he'll fulfil his promise to stop small boat crossings over the English Channel. But he's denied the plan is on hold amid the legal obstacles stopping the government's plan to process migrants in Rwanda. Being questioned by senior MPs today, Rishi Sunak denied there was no plan B if the Supreme Court does not overturn the ruling which blocks the removal of migrants to Rwanda. He says ministers will challenge the appeal court judgment confidently and vigorously. Well, strike news now, and junior doctors voted today to extend their strike action until at least January 2024. Members of the Hospital Consultants and Specialists Association in England decided to extend their strike action by another 6 months, with 96.5% voting in favour. The decision comes as junior doctors prepare to walk out for 5 days from July the 13th to the 18th. The Prime Minister says the strikes are making NHS waiting lists longer.
Already had 500,000 people's care be impacted by industrial action, and I don't think that's right. I think everyone can see the economic context that we're in and the necessity for the government to make responsible decisions.
And teachers' unions are calling on the government to release recommendations on pay made by an independent body. NEU members in England are staging fresh strikes tomorrow and again on Friday in their ongoing dispute over pay. All 4 education unions rejected the government's latest offer of £1,000 lump sum and a 4.5% pay rise. Thames Water has been fined £3.3 million for polluting 2 rivers in 2017. The company pleaded guilty, admitting to discharging millions of litres of undiluted sewage into the Gatwick Stream in Sussex and the River Mole in Surrey over the course of 6.5 hours, killing more than 1,400 fish. The judge said she believed Thames Water had also demonstrated a deliberate attempt to mislead the Environment Agency over the incident. You're up to date on TV, online, DAB+ radio and the TuneIn app. This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
There's a real problem with the nation's corporate culture. As we've been discussing, banks are closing down the accounts of people they don't agree with and not giving any reason. This has affected people we know from this programme, including Nigel Farage, who suddenly found not only that his account was closed, but he couldn't open other ones. We've had the reports of supermarkets gouging customers on petrol prices over 25p a gallon more than they need to be because they have kept prices high. And it's very odd that competition hasn't worked, because competition in a free market ought to see prices come down and the margins on petrol remain pretty stable. So the supermarkets, the banks, and then Unilever. This is really serious, because Unilever has been accused by the Ukrainian government of being an international sponsor of Putin's war. But what's gone wrong? Because all these business keeps on telling us how pious they are, how holy they are, whereas actually they have a very clear duty, and they always have. Businesses have to obey the law. They need, in their own interests, to serve their customers, and they have a fiduciary duty to their shareholders. What does that mean? Well, shareholders own the business. They are the ones, whether they own one share or they own millions of shares, who physically own the business. And they then employ the chief executive and the chairman and the board to run it on their behalf. And the job of the board is to run it, to pay dividends and to increase the value of the business for the shareholders. It's not their job to give their political opinions or to moralise, because the moralising doesn't make money for the shareholders, doesn't meet their fiduciary duty, but it also ends up being dangerous and hypocritical. Let's just take HSBC, the Hong Kong and Shanghai Banking Corporation. It's the top-rated bank by Stonewall. That's great. It encourages nurseries to do more to recognise children's trans identities. As it happens, I wouldn't want my children's trans identities to be identified. I hope they haven't got them. They also want to change the word mother to parent who's given birth. So while HSBC does this stuff that Stonewall approves of, but many others might think are actually pretty excessive and may give offence to mothers who want to be called mothers rather than parents who give birth, the same bank sucks up the totalitarian Chinese communist government. Now, the Chinese government is one of the most brutal governments in the world. It locks up its opponents, it arrests people for having religious beliefs, and what it's been doing to the Uyghurs is an enormous scandal of the highest order. People are arguing about whether technically it's a genocide or not, but it is unquestionably murderous. HSBC, which wears its heart on its sleeve and says it's so pious, actually supported China's national security law in Hong Kong. So when it affected its relationship with a totalitarian government, HSBC was on the wrong side. Unilever is just as bad, if not worse. If you read its annual report, it pontificates on sustainability, diversity, equality and inclusion. It moralises the whole time. Incidentally, it was quite pro-remaining in the European Union. But now it turns out it's supporting Russia. You could say it's making a complete Horlicks of its reputation. Unilever, including Horlicks, has some of the best-known brands in the world, famous over the decades. Those of us who think about Dennis Compton, a cricketer in the 1950s who was known as one of the Bill-Cream boys, Domestos, which kills all known germs dead, Persil, which washes whiter, and the one Cornetto that comes from All's Ice Cream. These may or may not be good products, but a company that currently trades with Russia is a moral vacuum, and its virtue signalling is humbug. If we want to be preached to, we'll go to church. Not such a bad idea. But as always, I want to know what you think. mailmog@gbnews.com. And I'm now delighted to be joined by my panel, former Brexit Party MEP Ben Habib, and author and broadcaster Michael Crick. Michael, you're slightly on the moralising wing of politics.
Really? That's the first I knew about it.
Are you in favour of companies telling us how virtuous they are?
Well, if they are virtuous, it's probably a good idea for them to tell us. And you've shown all sorts of hypocrisies there. I mean, one case, the whole thing about Stonewall and all that, that's really directed at the employees, and I think it's a matter for the employees. And if the people who work for that company, it makes them feel happier, then great for them. But it's not really a problem for the customers of, was it HSBC? Yes. The example you gave there. The more serious one is their dealings with China, and you left out a very important part of the appalling human rights record of China, which is frequently left out, which is their industrial ripping out of the organs of political prisoners and Falun Gong members, which has been going on over many years it's become an industry in China, and it's very little reported on, apart from a report done by Jeffrey Nice. But so there is huge hypocrisy here. And if Unilever are trading with Russia, well, they should be prosecuted. If there is substance to these allegations, then I hope they will be.
Well, it's the Ukrainian government that says that they are...
well, presumably...
I think the Ukrainian government will have got this wrong.
Will provide us with evidence. And
well, I think Unilever admits it, doesn't it? I think they're not denying it. I think they say that it's difficult to sell their business in Russia, and if they sold it, it would only be a Russian entity that bought it, and the whole thing would go on. So they've sort of removed themselves from the debate on it. But, I'm really glad we're having this discussion, Jacob, because corporate UK is being hijacked by this, and it's not something that executives are doing voluntarily. It is something that is being foisted on executives, directors of private companies, through the environmental, social and governance provisions that have now sort of infested their way through institutional investment, lending and so on. And so ESG, as it's now called, environmental social governance, requires companies, boards of directors, effectively to drive towards net zero and to have social policies which are enhancing for the environments in which they operate, which includes, amongst many other things, diversity and inclusion. Which for me, by the way, I always think of diversity and inclusion as the opposite of what it is. It's actually the creation of division between people. But diversity and inclusion is at the heart of social, and then governance is actually something that kind of makes sense. But ESG, for the first time in history, UK corporate executives are not obliged in the way that you described simply to look after shareholders' interests, pay their creditors, make sure their employees are paid their salaries, and of course HMRC gets its tax. We've now got this fifth component at the table, and we have to look after ESG. And in order to tick ESG boxes, you have to be seen to be doing positive social things.
This isn't the law. This is coming from my old profession, from fund managers who are under pressure from their clients. But whenever you go back, you follow the train of fiduciary duty. The ultimate owners of the shares are likely to be pensioners.
Yes.
And people like that who want their pension. And therefore pension fund managers and investment managers and companies are taking this moralising on against the ultimate duty to the ultimate beneficiary.
Well, that duty is,
it is promoted by government.
The trouble with that duty is
government hasn't changed the law.
It hasn't changed the law, but it promotes the policy.
I think it's quite reasonable, actually, that duty should be changed and relaxed for two reasons. First of all, it creates short-termism. In other words, you try and benefit your shareholders' dividend this year, and you don't think about what it might be in 10, 20, 50 years' time. That problem. But secondly, these, requiring companies to act responsibly in all sorts of ways, environmentally, or to think about how many women they have on their board, or how many women employees, or the gender gap, all of these things are, I think they are perfectly reasonable requirements on companies.
But the problem...
And I accept there may be some cost, but in the long term, I think there's also a benefit.
But that's the problem, Michael, because how, as an executive, how do you measure up the cost versus the benefit? When you have a simple set of obligations that are set out in the Companies Act, which require you to fulfil certain, duties as a director, it's straightforward. But the minute you inject something which is virtually impossible, it's incapable of being judged independently. It's all down to the subjectivity of the individual looking at the corporation. Are they doing their best? I mean, Unilever's a great example, because Unilever's trading in Russia, yet it's got a subsidiary called Ben & Jerry's, which I'm sure you're familiar with, that is forever virtue signalling. And in fact, the founders of Ben & Jerry's, this is really interesting, the founders of Ben & Jerry's are suing Unilever because Unilever is selling its products in Israel. And that offends the founders of Ben & Jerry's, even though they've sold their business to Unilever. You've got really odd things going on in the capitalist system. And you can't balance them up.
Well, I think you have to. I mean, people in other walks of life, politicians, headmasters, people running the health service have to balance all sorts of requirements and duties. In a way, chief executives, if all they do is have to think about the benefit to shareholders, they have it easy. I think by imposing some extra social requirements on people.
There's the law. And that's the bit. This isn't law.
Some bits of this are law.
Well, then they've got to follow that.
Yes.
We've had Thames Water in the news has polluted a river.
Yes.
They get fined. That's the law. Yeah. That's fine.
Health and safety, that's the law. Yeah.
Is so vague.
But the problem with ESG, it isn't the law, but the government practices it.
We're going to have to move on. We've got a statement from Unilever. Listen very carefully. I will say this only once. We understand why there are calls for Unilever to leave Russia. We also want to be clear that we are not trying to protect or manage our business in Russia. However, for companies like Unilever, which have a significant physical presence in the country, exiting is not straightforward. The first option would be to try to close down the business, which currently employs around 3,000 people. The second option would be to sell the business. None of these options are desirable. Nevertheless, we believe the third remains the best option. So I hope that is clear. Thanks to my panel for that. Don't forget to let me know what you think. mailmog@gbnews.com. Coming up, the latest Tory Ginger group emerges and has a potential solution to mass migration. Miriam Cates and Danny Kruger are waiting in the wings, and we'll be asking, should the government listen to them? Plus, the Prime Minister's on a bit of a sticky wicket as he finds himself with a negative approval rating for the first time on Conservative Home. Will he manage to pull off his 5 key pledges?
First and foremost, I am a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the People's Channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
The Live Desk with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Pip Thompson. It's here Monday to Friday on GB News.
From midday, we'll bring you the news as it breaks, whenever it's happening and wherever it's happening, from across the UK and around the world.
Refreshing, feisty, but with a bit of fun too.
If it matters to you, we'll have it covered on TV, radio and online.
Join the Live Desk on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
When the news happens, it happens here.
And really important breaking news.
Breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news starts here on Britain's Newsroom.
All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's Newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. I'm still Jacob Rees-Mogg, and this is State of the Nation. You've been getting in touch with your thoughts. Egan says, might buy more Unilever shares now. Well, this is not, fortunately, an advice programme, so don't take advice necessarily. Clive says, what are the chances of you, Nigel, and other like-minded businessmen setting up a challenger bank which promises not to debank because of opinions? I'd both invest and move my accounts to such a bank. That's a great business idea. I will look into it. So it was 6 months ago today that the Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, made his 5 key pledges for the year. It just so happens, rather unfortunately, that today also marks the first time his approval rating has gone into negative territory on the Conservative Home rating, which is of Conservative supporters and interested parties. So whilst I'm often critical of the government, I think the PM's become rather an easy target because the pledges which focused around the economy, the NHS, the small boats, have been affected by external factors that have made the Prime Minister's task harder. The NHS is still recovering from the pandemic. It's suffering from strikes. Doctors, even well-paid ones, seem to be thinking that they should walk out. Inflation has become entrenched because of the inept monetary policy of the Bank of England. And in terms of migration, the Court of Appeals just overturned the High Court's ruling on Rwanda, while the House of Lords is busy gutting the illegal migration bill. It really isn't the Prime Minister's fault. Sometimes politicians cannot deliver, even when they make their best efforts. However, my panel's back, and I'm sure they may well disagree with me, former Brexit Party MEP Ben Habib and the author and broadcaster Michael Craig. Ben, well, Rishi's doing his absolute best, and he is beset by obstructionism from various blob-like quarters.
Well, for the first time, I find myself at odds with you, Jacob, if I may say so. Rishi is squarely responsible for having broken the economy. I found it quite amusing that during the leadership campaign, he kept saying, you know, I'm the responsible one, I understand numbers, I'm going to fix everything. Actually, he was the one who was Chancellor of the Exchequer at a time when the UK borrowed more money than it had in all of history until 2005. He did that in a year. He was the one who took taxes up to the highest level since World War II. He was the one who wanted to punish us with a national insurance increase, contrary to the Conservative Party manifesto, as we emerged from lockdowns, blinking as we were, rubbing our eyes, trying to make sense of the new world order into which we emerged. Rishi Sunak, I'm afraid, is squarely at the heart of the problems that the country faces. And the promises he made are disingenuous. And the reason I say that is because he made two in particular. One, that he would grow the economy, and the other, that he would reduce debt. No government in history has ever reduced debt. You can reduce debt as a proportion of GDP, but they are one and the same promise. And it was hoodwinking the public, Jacob, when he made that promise.
Pitt the Younger had the sinking fund, and Nigel Lawson had the public sector in credit. But
very,
never mind.
very few, then.
At the time he made these promises, I thought, this man's bonkers. These are not. I thought, I'm not sure he can keep any of those promises. I mean, maybe the NHS waiting times, he could, and it doesn't look like he's going to keep those now, or at least the turnaround is now predicted, sort of spring of next year. I mean, all of the other ones, it seemed to me, 6 months ago, were far too ambitious. I mean, stop the boats. I mean, a more sensible, a more experienced. I think one of the problems Sunak has, he's not actually been a politician for very long. He's only been a politician, well, an MP since, what, 2015, that's 8 years, and he wasn't in politics, you know, he was doing think tank stuff for about a year before that. He's a very inexperienced politician. No politician, and it's his advisor's fault as well.
And he was quite junior in banking when he left banking.
You know,
people keep talking about his Goldman Sachs history.
There was no way he was going to stop the boats in 18 months. He might have been able to reduce the number of boats, in which case you come up with a promise like that. Inflation, it seemed to me, was likely to go on for a lot longer than we thought 6 months ago.
Because lots of people didn't. Lots of economists thought that was quite an easy promise because they thought we were following other countries down. But the Bank of England is surely more responsible for that than Rishi Sunak.
And cutting the debt. I mean, as Ben says, cutting the debt. Now, reducing the annual debt, the annual PSPR, that
may be a target you can achieve.
And cutting the debt as a percentage of GDP was, I think, what he meant.
Exactly. But he didn't say that. He didn't say that, though, did he?
And whoever drew up that list of promises should be sacked. And Sunak has got a lot to answer for. He's going to do him, you know, it's going to humiliate him.
Yeah.
Well, the only problem is when have these promises got to be achieved? End of this year, by the election? Either way, it's quite likely he'll get, there'll be a whitewash for the other side.
The real problem, I think, the Prime Minister has, is that he's absent of ideas. You know,
he had 5 promises. These were great ideas. But they weren't.
They were great mission statements. Yeah. But he's got no mechanism. He's articulated no mechanism by which to deliver them. What he's doing is more of the same of what got us into this problem in the first place.
If we get on the small boats, where he really has done things, he's been thwarted by the appeal court, which was surprising because
Jacob,
the High Court
I'm going to have to disagree with you.
And the House of Lords. Come on, you're not going to defend the House of Lords.
No, I'm going to say the illegal migration bill, as drafted, simply doesn't work. There is no one in the country, I think, who would want more to stop the boats than I would. But there's a carve-out for the European Court of Human Rights in the illegal migration bill. In the first instance, it directs the Home Secretary to detain and deport people who enter the country, and then it gives her a carve-out if the ECHR should disagree. And that undermines the whole bill.
All right, well, we're in perhaps the surprising position that I am Mr Sunak's greatest defender on GB News this evening. But thanks to my panel. Coming up, London's mayor has been taken to the High Court by a group of councils over his plans to expand ULEZ into Greater London. But will the court listen to the people? But first, the Tory Ginger Group, which you've all been waiting for, on mass migration. How do we solve the problem?
Like all families, we have arguments every now and then, but actually we agree on what the mission of GB News is, and that's the most fundamentally important thing.
GB News provides the kind of platform that lets all voices be heard. We don't hold back. We're free to say what we really think.
Just because some people who live in a tiny little Westminster bubble think that their particular story is important, that's not the most important story for me.
And often they will be difficult stories, stories that you won't find on the establishment media.
Because what people think in the north of England may be very different to what they're thinking in the home counties.
We're going to carry on telling the world what life is really like for households up and down the UK.
We love to be in your car, in your kitchen as you're having your breakfast. Whatever you're doing, you are part of the show. If it matters to you, it matters to us.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics, and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it. So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hi, I'm Dan Wootton. You can watch me live on GB News Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. And did you know that you can also watch and listen live on our website, gbnews.com. You'll always be up to date on the latest breaking news, as well as enjoying the best stories, opinions, and shows. You can even join the debate under our live player as you're watching. So head straight to gbnews.com on TV, radio, and online. GB News, Britain's news channel.
So Jubes & Co, we tackle the issues of the day with real robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Welcome back. I remain Jacob Rees-Mogg, and you've been getting in touch with your thoughts. Colin says, Rishi won't achieve any of his 5 pledges. The Tories are toast at the next election. We may as well say nothing and let them do what they want. And when they're gone, get rid of all the wokes and eco-zealots in the party and rebuild with true Tories for the 2029 election. And Glenn says the neutering of the House of Lords is long overdue. As Churchill said over 100 years ago, the House of Lords is an enemy of progress. Well, Colin really is a good preamble to what we've discussed on this programme previously. In spite of repeated electoral mandates for reducing immigration, the net migration figure continues to rise. Whilst 2016 migration figures were just over 300,000, figures published for this year have revealed we're now nearly double that at 606,000. As long ago as the 2010 election, the Conservatives pledged to bring the numbers down from the hundreds to the tens of thousands. That promise has been made consistently since, was reinforced by the Brexit vote and by the election in 2019, which gave a clear mandate to deal with migration and bring the number down. But here we are with a high number that has been eroding public trust. And this leads in to the newly launched New Conservatives group, who have proposed a range of solutions, including the closing of temporary eligibility schemes or raising the skilled work visa salary threshold to £38,000 a year. And I'm now delighted to be joined by two members of the group, Danny Kruger and Miriam Cates. And our token lefty, Michael Crick, is still here. But I'll come to you later, Michael. Miriam, can I start with this? Because actually this is a new group. Immigration is one of the things you're talking about. But you're really trying to show that the Tories still have some ideas, even after 13 years in government.
Yes, so we're a group of MPs who've been elected since 2016, and in that time, I think people have voted 4 times for a mandate to reduce migration, and it was one of our key pledges. So clearly we have an interest as politicians, as well as in terms of serving our electorate, in bringing that figure down. Now, the Prime Minister has made some a great start in illegal migration and some adjustment to the student scheme, which will bring numbers down somewhat, but we're just proposing some additional ideas to really bring those numbers further down to what we promised.
OK, well, Danny, we've heard this again and again and again, and the numbers go up and up and up. Why does a new group actually make any difference? Isn't it same old Tories, same old message, and we fail to deliver?
Well, there's certainly not going to... It's not enough for us to say that we need to bring the numbers down. It's not enough for any of us as MPs to make these pledges. We need to actually see it happen, and we are on a manifesto commitment to do so. All 3 of us were elected with that commitment. Anybody can see that there have been events since 2019 that weren't anticipated, increase in refugee numbers, particularly from Ukraine and Hong Kong, and that's understandable. Those numbers will fall naturally. But since 2019, I'm afraid to say, because of our new points-based immigration system, which we should be very proud of having the freedom to do since Brexit, the fact is that system is too lenient, and there are too many people who are able to come here, not just for work, of course, it's families as well. People can bring their families in with them. So migration has risen far too high since the early Blair years, of course, when he opened up the borders to the EU. But since we've left the EU, we've now seen numbers rise from the rest of the world, and we have to bring them down.
But how do we get over the various blockages? So the Treasury is constantly saying that this is the only way to get economic growth, and that's very powerful within Conservative circles, let alone officialdom. The courts are making it almost impossible to stop illegal migration, and the House of Lords won't pass tough migration bills. So we can say these things. How do we actually do them?
Well, I mean, that's a good question, but I think we do have the freedom, as Danny said, to adjust this points-based system. That doesn't need new legislation. We can just change the guidance. And I think when we brought in this initial salary cap of 26,000, I mean, perhaps the government didn't think it would lead to the kind of migration levels that it has done. But we have seen those levels rise, and it's right to increase the salary threshold to the point at which people become net contributors to our economy. So I think that's a really important start. But there are things we can do without legislation.
The trouble is that, with what you're saying, is that the British economy is hugely dependent on more migration. That's why the figures have gone up to 606,000. The illegal immigration is only a small part of it. The health service is dependent on migration, and the universities have become hugely dependent on foreign students. If you were... and I don't believe it would ever happen in a million years, but if you were, before the next election, or even, shortly afterwards, to get it down to Damien Green and David Cameron's promise of tens of thousands, the economic effect would be devastating.
Well, I think you've used exactly the right word, dependent. We are dependent on this mass level of cheap labour from abroad, and until we end that dependency, we're not going to see any improvements.
But you're not going to do that overnight, are you?
No, we're not going to do that overnight.
But we have to do it. We have to take this extremely important step of saying that progressively but quickly we will stop the inflow of cheap labour, because you're right, the economy that we have at the moment is totally dependent on this source of labour, but we need to change the economy so that people are properly investing, businesses are investing in technology, in training of skills. We ourselves as a country are training our own young people rather than sending them off to universities to do degrees that aren't going to help them get a job that will sustain them in life. We need to be supporting our own businesses and our own young people. So we have to change the economic model. And that will only happen if we make this really important step of saying we're going to reduce the flow of inward migration. And that will induce the changes that are needed. But it can't happen immediately. but it's got to start now.
But I think a lot of employers would be who can't, you know, we only have to see all around us when we go to restaurants and hotels how often people are short of staff. And a lot of employers will be terrified by what you're saying, that they would agree with the idea in the long term, yes, but if it's going to be done in the short term, in time for the next election, then the economic effects will be huge.
That's the point, that the dependency has to be broken. And actually, we don't want to be a nation of fruit pickers on very low wages. That's not the future for the UK economy. We want productivity gains. We want businesses to be investing in automation, which they're not doing as long as they get effectively the drug of endless cheap immigration.
Exactly. And going back to your earlier point about the economy, the problem is that the way that the Treasury and the OBR measure growth is just GDP, overall GDP. So, of course, the more people you bring in, the bigger your economy looks. But mass migration has not improved our GDP per capita. It hasn't made us better off as a country. And until we end this addiction to low-wage, low-skill migration, we're not going to see those productivity gains. And yes, we have a tight labour market, but we also have 5 million people who are economically inactive. We've got 700,000 people on long-term sickness benefits who want to work. There will never be any incentive to bring those people back into the job market until we end the supply of cheap labour.
But the only way you're going to get a lot of those people back into the job market is by paying them more. And that, of course, is inflationary. Well, it may be good in the long term.
We need to be paying people more.
But it contributes more to inflation, particularly if they're in the private sector, than if they're in the public sector.
Yes and no, because it gets them off benefit dependency and therefore allows us ultimately to reduce taxes, which is not inflationary because it lowers the percentage of the economy.
Exactly. And until we make those changes, we won't bring those people back. And really, we need to get back to the situation where the market is setting the right wages to attract the right people with the right skills and retain those people, like we saw with the HGV crisis during COVID.
And the New Conservatives, this is the start of lots of policy ideas you're going to be bringing forward. Are you going to give me the exclusive on what your next policy idea is going to be?
We can give you that exclusive, Jacob. We're going to be working on skills. So this is a really important question. What are we going to do if we're cutting ourselves off from cheap imported labour? Well, we need to be recruiting in the British workforce. We need to invest in people's skills and training. So we're going to be looking at the higher education system and the further education system, adult education. So that's our next project. But yes, over the next few months, we want to be working with colleagues to develop a range of policy projects. We'd love to hear from your viewers, Jacob, and people in the country. Visit our website, sign up to hear from us. We'd like to develop a range of plans. Nothing against current government policy. We're being accused of sort of being rebellious. What we're doing is supporting the government's mission, very much in support of what the government's doing, particularly around migration and the economy, developing ideas for the next manifesto.
But, I mean, again, skills is long-term, but yes.
I'd like to give Michael the last word, but not on this occasion. Thank you, Michael, Danny and Miriam. Coming up, ULEZ has had its day in court, but how will the High Court rule?
I joined GB News because I was sick and tired of not hearing my views being represented, not just mine, but so many people that I knew and spoke to.
I just couldn't get my voice out there. I couldn't say anything. I couldn't do anything. Whatever the narrative was, I kind of had to follow it.
GB News is there to provide a voice for those who have been ignored by the establishment media. We think different things. We've got a different style.
GB News is here to be optimistic and positive about the future.
It's real kind of dynamic and flowing, with the audience very much at the heart of it, like a big family.
Here at GB News, we talk about the things that matter to you.
Hearing the voices from right across our towns and cities, especially our towns.
All sides of the argument represented with a heavy dose of opinion.
We're on a mission here to make a difference.
And the GB News family really is here for you, and whatever time of day you can watch or listen.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates.
Do you not believe in prison?
I don't believe in prison.
I'm completely stunned.
I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess I've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Weeknights on GB News from 6 p.m. You'll always get drama.
Please stop, Michelle.
I know, yeah.
Please stop.
Should I just shut up?
Romance.
You like me, I like you. There you go.
There you are. Well, don't tell anybody.
Adventure.
Etc.
That's the whole point.
And action.
Sergeant, the big read, my superstar panel, they're already at it. They're fighting. It's going to be quite a show.
Only on GB News. Britain's watching.
In a world of dull and predictable radio and TV shows.
Oh, hi. On Mark Dolan tonight, we've got big guests. We drill into the big stories of the day. The show adds up to a brilliant listening and viewing experience. Mark Dolan Tonight is the most entertaining current affairs show ever, and that's a fact. That's Mark Dolan Tonight, Friday, Saturday and Sunday from 9. Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Start the day with GB News.
We catch up on all the big stories you didn't hear the night before.
And take a look at what the world's talking about this morning. That's right, Monday to Thursdays from 6 o'clock. It's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Straight after breakfast, join us, Bev Turner and Andrew Pearce. We're going to take you through till noon.
We'll be tackling the big topics of the day, including the things that the other channels just won't talk about. If it's happening here. Wake up to mornings on GB News, the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. I continue to identify as Jacob Rees-Mogg, and this is State of the Nation. You've been getting in touch with your mail mogs. Steve says, the Tories have been in for 13 years and now have an 80-seat majority. It's their fault, as they could have changed laws for all of this, especially immigration. Today, 5 councillors took on Sadiq Khan in the High Court over his plans to expand ULEZ into Greater London. Council lawyers argued that the London mayor lacks the power to order the expansion and claimed that key information was not disclosed during previous consultations. TfL has claimed that over 91% of cars in Greater London will be unaffected by ULEZ and won't have to pay the £12.50 charge. However, lawyers representing the councils argue that their statistics derived from the data of number plate recognition cameras is insufficient, on the basis that only a small pool of cameras were used to reach this conclusion. Council leaders from Bexley, Bromley, Harrow and Hillingdon, along with Surrey County Council, have argued that this expansion puts unjust pressure on their communities to pay a charge that will see TfL earn £200 million in the first year of operation. Unlike the developed transport system of central London, many constituents in the outskirts aren't afforded the same luxuries of tubes or consistent buses, leaving especially some of the older generation in an unfair, costly predicament. But Vox Populi, Vox Dei. We asked the people what they thought of all this, and the people have spoken.
I don't know if there are ways to make it easier for the people who are really affected financially by it, but greening the cities and making the air better for everyone seems hugely, hugely important to me.
It's really hard for people who've got older cars, you know, to be able to go to the supermarket and places like that, or the doctors. Yeah, so I'm not in favour of it.
I do feel for people that are sort of my generation, that literally the car is working fine, it's getting you from A to B. We all want a better climate and a better situation for our pollution. I've got 6 grandchildren, but it's not all down to cars. You know, we're going to stop planes soon, are we?
I agree with the central principle of ULEZ, but I'm sceptical on the money. So I think it's a money-making scheme.
I'm now joined by Baroness O'Neill, the leader of Bexley Council. Baroness O'Neill, thank you so much for joining me. So, isn't it always a bit odd when one part of the state, a council, is taking another part of the state to court?
Yeah, it's very unfortunate, Jacob, because actually we've been saying to the mayor all along, it's the wrong thing for the outer London boroughs. You know, we were all supportive when it was central London, but outer London is very different. Actually, what this has shown is the mayor doesn't understand outer London. You won't find a tube station in Bexley, Jacob. There isn't one. You know, the reality is that we have 3 mainline services going into London. We have buses. So there is a real dependency on the car, as actually some of your people have just said. And it's not just about elderly people, although we'll all know the story where someone buys their last car and lovingly looks after it and, you know, make sure that that allows them to see the grandchildren or go to doctor's appointments or do the weekly shop or whatever. But actually, what about women of a night? You know, you get in your car, you feel secure. If you go on public transport, you know, there's not the frequency of buses and you don't feel as secure. So, you know, the reality is there is a security element as well. There's also the fact that when the mayor could do things about public transport to improve them in outer London, he's not bothered.
And
So
it
in
hits the poorest
Bexley,
the
the
most,
hardest part to get around is in the north of our borough. Superloop won't be going there, and he's not bringing the DLR into it.
And it's hitting the poorest most, that the people who have old cars, who may be working at unsocial hours, they're the ones who really get hit by this, whereas people who can afford new cars, they're fine. Is that part of your argument?
It is part of the argument, but actually it's not just older people, you know, actually care workers, people that we really depend on. You know, you've had crass people saying, well, they can go on the buses. Well, actually, a care worker can't go on the buses because they won't get to the number of people they need to get to in the day. Yeah, people like our police officers and all that. Sorry.
What about the air quality? How worried are you about the air quality in your borough? Do you think this will improve it, or do you think this won't make a huge amount of difference?
So it's not been proven that actually it will make a difference to the air quality in our borough. And we believe that there are things that the mayor could do that would be far more cost effective and would make a bigger difference rather than just being a cash cow.
Well, thank you very much, Baroness O'Neill. With me now is Don McCarthy, the Climate Media Coalition Director. Thank you very much for coming in. You're backing Sadiq Khan. You think he's right to be doing this, even though it will hit some of the least well-off in London, in the outer boroughs.
Yeah, well, actually, pollution is hitting the worst off in London. Poor people are 7 times more likely to die of lung diseases in London than richer people. So it's really targeted at the poor who are suffering in London. Secondly, I find it really extraordinary to see an elected official trying to prevent cleaner air for her public in her constituency and the issue of the poor. I'm sorry, for the last 10 years, the Tory government has increased the cost of commuter trains into London above inflation. The Tory candidate for mayor has opposed Sadiq Khan fare freeze every year for the last 10 years. And the government has now insisted that the mayor get rid of the free travel pass for morning use for all pensioners, 1.5 million pensioners, and every single person on benefits now paying more for public transport, and 95% of the poor do not have cars.
But if you go back to the ULEZ charge, this originates essentially in the drive for diesel was pushed by a Labour government and the European Union. And isn't this desperately unfair? Because people who bought diesel cars thought they were doing the right thing. They were told by governments to do this. And now they're being clobbered for having done something they were encouraged to do.
It's correct. At the time when they were promoting diesel, the science about the impact on lung pollution was not evident at the time. As science became aware, we now realise we have to both not only tackle petrol cars, but we also have to tackle diesel cars. And the issue of unfairness, the mayor has said £5,000 grant will be given to every single person who has on-child benefit in Outer London who has a car. So he's dealing with that issue, and they're dealing with the issue of van holders are getting £9,500 grant.
But that doesn't help the elderly, who are particularly dependent on their cars, or as Baroness O'Neill said, women who don't have children, who may feel unsafe at night, and are hit by this 24 hours a day. So they're hit by it even when they're taking journeys on social times.
So the scrappage is available to people on low incomes. And if you are concerned about pensioners, Do you think that the Tory government should have got rid of the free AM travel for all pensioners? Because that means pensioners who are going to look after their children's kids to go to school now have to pay to get to the kids' school. And so that is impacting on pensioners, all pensioners. So why is the Tories only concerned about a tiny number of notional pensioners in outer London?
Because nothing is for free. Everything has to be paid for. And that taxation falls on the poorest in society as well, that VAT hits the poorest most. So the more things you say are for free, actually they have to be paid for by somebody. And isn't it better that users of services pay for them rather than general taxation?
So what you're saying is you care about the pensioners, but then when I say that actually the Tories are taking away free travel from pensioners, you say that's not. Remember, London has
I'm against putting extra taxes on them.
London has the highest
choice.
London has the you said you're caring about the poor.
Yeah.
The lady says they care about the poor. And what you have done is you've increased commuter train fares on the poor above inflation for 10 years. And remember, London's travel costs are the most expensive in the world because we're the only capital city in the world that the Tory government has refused
it's not the Tory
to subsidise.
Government. TfL loses a huge amount of money every year. This has got to be paid for by somebody. This money isn't coming
we're the only
nowhere.
We're the only capital city in the world that has no funding historically from the government. We cut all of it after Boris left.
The GLA gets huge subsidies from the government.
The GLA gets subsidy,
yes, that's right.
but TfL doesn't.
But the GLA then decides how to spend its money.
No, there's a grant for TfL. It's actually...
TfL has been bailed out by the government.
Do you accept we have the largest...
During COVID, TfL was bailed out by the government several times.
It had to be.
Well, so you're now saying it got no money
No, I'm saying it got bailed out for COVID.
It got hundreds of millions in taxpayers' money to keep it going.
But
TfL's also been very badly run.
No, it's not.
It wastes huge amounts of money. You see endless buses that are empty driving around.
What you'll do is you throw out something that's different. I am saying we are the only capital city in the world.
Wait a minute. The
only capital city in the world that had no revenue funding. Secondly, this whole thing about ULEZ applies to a tiny group of people and it distracts from the real issue.
But the GLA
and the real issue
money.
is climate change that you don't want action on.
No,
that's a distraction from. Look at what's happening at the moment.
I don't want to make people cold and poor. That's the thing.
Neither do I.
And I think a lot of the climate change goes the wrong way. So if you look at the diesel thing, the diesel was encouraged because people were obsessed by carbon dioxide rather than about nitrates and particulates. And that made things much, much worse in London and made the air in London worse because people were worrying about the wrong target and gave people bad advice.
You say you care about people being cold and poor. I agree.
Yes.
So what does the Tory government do? They cut the insulation programme that was going to insulate 9 million homes. 9 million homes this winter would have had lower bills if you hadn't cut that insulation programme. Secondly, you have banned, the only country in the world has banned onshore wind, the cheapest form of energy in the world, and you've refused to invest in storage. So on two things, you've made energy more expensive and you have actually made people
We must have
poorer.
another discussion on fracking, which would provide us with lots of cheap energy. But thank you so much for coming in. That's all from me. Up next, it's the great Professor Daniel Wootton. Dan, I hear you have a surprise for me.
Yes, Jacob. Have you heard what people in Team Boris are calling the 7 folk, the 7 brave Tories, you're one of them, named in the Privileges Committee report?
No, I haven't.
OK, well, look, I'm going to show you, Jacob. Look at this. It is the Magnificent 7. There you are, riding on horseback. And one of those people, Jacob, Dame Andrea Jenkins, will be breaking her silence on the show tonight. She knows that it puts her at personal risk, as it has with you, but she thinks democracy is too important to stay silent.
Well, that's absolutely brilliant. Delighted that you're defending free speech, which seems to be the topic of the hour at the moment. That's all coming up after the news. I will be back at 8 o'clock tomorrow. And it may have been raining today, but tomorrow it'll be sunny in Somerset, I'm sure.
Hello there, it's Aidan McGivern here from the Met Office with the GB News forecast. After a soggy Tuesday in many parts, it does turn drier eventually overnight. And it looks like Wednesday will be a fine day for many. Still some showers about, but actually a better chance of some drier and brighter interludes. We've seen the wet weather arrive in the south through the day. That's slow to clear overnight. And with the rain across central and southeastern parts of England, we've got a blustery wind that blows through the channel, and increasingly that wind